Yeah, what a lousy day. Anyway, this is the Fujifilm 55 to 200 millimeter zoom. Now, normally I have very high expectations of Fujifilm optics. They've been good in the past. The lens you're watching this on now is a Fujifilm 55, no, sorry, 18 to 55, and it's very good quality. But on a recent trip, or after coming back from a recent trip and reviewing my images, I was a little disappointed with this. So let's get into that. So I took this Fujifilm XF 55 to 200 millimeter lens with me on a trip, and noticed that in particular on the left side of these portrait shots, which would correspond to the top of the frame if I was shooting landscape, and also on this side, which corresponds to the left side if you're shooting landscape, that it's got quite soft. And I'll show you what I mean. If we zoom in, let's pick a spot here. I'm going unfairly up to 200%, which is normally not fair to go that far, but I just wanted to show you. See on the left there, in this area, what the trees look like. They look very soft. And as we head over to the right, you notice that the trunks are not as soft as they were on the other side. So I'll go back over it for reference here. Look how soft that is. And this seems to be pretty much all the way up the image. You can see here the tree trunks here are very soft. If I go to the right hand side of the image, things start to get a bit sharper again, and you can see certainly the trunks of these aspens are just fine. So again, another shot was taken in the same region, if we do the same thing here, I'm going to go into take it to about 200%. And let's start at the bottom. Now this is not a depth of field problem. This was shot at f10. So I mentioned earlier that the bottom of the frame when you shoot in portrait mode seemed to be very soft, but look at this. This doesn't look very nice. And even over to the right hand side here. So if I scroll up a little bit, you see things get better. You can see the tree trunks here. But as I scroll to the left again, the left side of the frame, everything's very, very soft. And we'll do one more up here. You'll see all this area looks unacceptably soft to me. And if we go right over to the right hand side, again, we're at 200%. You can see that these trees are as sharp as they can be at 200%. So this isn't Fuji bashing by any stretch of the imagination. I love the Fuji products. I love the X line of cameras. But I guess you have to consider that at this price point, you're going to get some flaws. So I've used this chart before. It's online. It's produced by Cornell University. And this is basically a resolution chart that will allow you to evaluate a lens from corner to corner, center to corner sort of thing. And if we just now zoom in on this, no, went the wrong way. We just zoom in on this, just look at this center target. This was shot with that 55 to 200 millimeter lens at f3.5 at the 55 millimeter end. So you can see it's pretty good resolution here. We're looking at separation between these lines here and here, right at the center of the chart. But let's go over to start with the top left of this chart. It looks pretty horrible. You can see there's some fringing here all around the letters as well. And if we go over to the top right corner on this, again, this is the side of the lens that I said was not performing well when I went on my trip. Also, you can see by this 16:9 designation and these arrows that there's some awful aberration there. If we go down here, it's not great, but it's not as bad. And then if we zoom over to the left-hand side, again, not too bad, but you can see a little bit of fringing here. So now we're looking at the same focal length on that lens, 55 millimeters, but this time we're at f8. And again, you can see the target looks pretty much like it did when it was at f3.5. We're getting some nice resolution right near the center of the chart. Again, let's go over to the left side of the chart and scroll up. And it looks pretty decent. It looks like, as you'd expect, going to a smaller aperture, that you would actually get some improvement in performance. And a little bit softer on that side, I would say. And if we go down here, still pretty sharp. No complaints about how this is performing with these particular settings. So now we're looking at f4 at 100 millimeters. And as we can see from the center of the chart here, not too bad. Admittedly, if I didn't get this focus exactly right, it's going to perhaps be unfair to talk about this focal length versus another focal length. But let's have a look as we go over to the left-hand side. Again, this is at f4. Let's go up to the top left. Not too bad. Surprisingly, it looks pretty good. And if we go over to the right-hand side of the chart, this is where we start seeing a little bit of problem. It's definitely softening up. Again, this is on that troublesome side that the lens has shown some soft results. So if we go down to the bottom, again, I think it's better. If we go back up, yeah, definitely the 16:9 numbers look soft compared to this. So this is the kind of aberration you wouldn't expect. You'd expect it to be, you know, even on the same in all the corners at least. So this one is not looking too bad on this side, surprisingly. Again, we'll go back to the start here and have a look at that. That's not too bad at all. So the problem is on the top right on this particular view. So now we're looking at 100 millimeters again, but this time at f8. And here's the surprising part. If we look at the center, of course, it doesn't look too bad. Looks pretty good. Again, we're at 200%, which is kind of unfair when you're looking at a photo. You should look at it at 100%. If we go up to the top left-hand corner here, it doesn't really look much different from what it did at f4. And if we go over here, it's a little softer, but it's still fairly acceptable. It's good down there. But the surprising part is the pictures I showed you at the beginning that were taken on my trip were shot at about f10 and at this focal length, which is 100 millimeters. And they look terribly soft along this edge. But this doesn't look too bad. It almost looks acceptable. I think if we look at this chart here, and if we go over to the right-hand side to look at the equivalent chart, I'd say the one on the right's a little bit sharper, but it's not dramatically different. So there you go, inconsistent results. But nonetheless, those two photographs that I showed at the beginning do exhibit quite a bit of distortion around this region. Okay, so I'm going to do things in slightly backward order here. We're at 200 millimeters right now, and I'm going to start at f8 rather than wide open. And you can see even the centered target looks a little softer, and I'm not certain if that's just a focus problem on my part or whether that is an indicator of some aberration in the lens, even at the center. But let's go over to the left-hand side for a moment and scroll down. Again, this is at f8. This looks terrible as far as I'm concerned. And as we scroll up, it's somewhat better, perhaps, but still these letters, these numbers look pretty blurry. If we go over to the right-hand side It definitely looks better. Not perfect, but it looks better. And if we scroll down, it looks even better still in this corner. So here we go, that we're seeing unevenness across the entire field of the lens. And finally, this one is at 200 millimeters still, and at maximum aperture, which is f4.8. And again, the center looks a little soft. Is that a matter of my focusing, or is that a matter of there being a bit of an aberration in the center of this lens? It's not sharpest at longest focal length. But let's have a look over here. Here's the surprising part, that now, even at wide open aperture, it actually looks better than it did at f8. I can't explain this one. Even the bottom left-hand corner, not too bad. It's quite acceptable. Again, we're looking at 200% here. And go to this corner, slightly soft, but not too bad. And the same thing with this corner. So just to conclude, as you would expect, in some cases, the lens looks worse at wide open than it does stop down to, say, f8. But I did see the inverse of that happening at 200 millimeters. Not really certain why. But the evidence is in the actual travel photos that you see here. There's that consistent softness on the left side and the bottom on both of these images when shot in portrait mode. So I wish the results were better, but it's disappointing. Anyway, the Fuji XF 55 to 200 millimeter lens, I must admit, was a bit of a disappointment. I'm not sure how it could have left the factory with what I consider a bad error or a bad aberration along the one side. It just looked a little too soft for me. And although I did mention at the beginning of this video that in that price point range, I don't know what you can expect really. Shouldn't expect too much. But it's got me thinking maybe I should be replacing it with some primes. Problem is, when you're traveling, having extra primes in your travel bag is not a good thing necessarily. So from that standpoint, it's a bit of a disappointment. I would have loved to have just that one lens to cover everything from 55 to 200. Oh yeah, if you liked what you saw, could you give it one of these, please? Thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and then if you hit the notification bell, you'll get to see more of these videos.